Good afternoon. We now are coming to the final wrap-up part of the day and a half of our discussions. You may still remember Shigeo Rodin was sitting there thinking about the future of universities. I can tell you a day and a half afterwards, if I would put the same picture on, you would see the same head, but with a lot of fumes and, steam, because there's so much that has gone on. And another picture would be potentially maybe a light going on or not. I want to, first of all, thank everybody while we are welcoming our summarizers. I want to thank me personally. I've learned a lot. I want to thank the representatives of, I think, our 6 international universities who in the various forms have shared their experiences, our 3 national universities that were one way or the other speakers, debaters, panelists, our independent experts, we had 3 or 4 of them, and of course our students who really, I think, animated yesterday's session and brought us all back to the question of why are we actually here? I'm not so sure whether we are going to have a pigeonhole for this event or not. What we will try to do is, in any case, I would really welcome if you could send us over the next few days via pigeonhole, whatever means you have, send us your feedback. Whether you liked the sessions, whether you liked the titles, whether you liked the format, whether you felt that we were addressing the right questions or not, because we all want to take those on board. And in particular also, if you could also give us already a sense of what are the types of topics that you want to see in the future, okay, so that we can continue to build on this year's conference. Apart from the EHELF exercise, now I need to obviously negotiate with my own budgetary authorities and have to think about a way of convincing them. It's not always easy, discussing with your administrative arm and your financial people, as Provost Ade says, the money people. One of the things that I took away is we are all together facing the question of university-based research, and the linkage to business and the economy. How are we linking the two together? We just already heard also. And basically these are pretty much universal challenges that we all have around the world. So I'm thinking already about a separate event sometime later this year or early next year, separate from EHELF, so that we can have a much more sort of, this linkage type of event over a day and a half. But that aside, are we ready? Okay. I have the pleasure of introducing 3 speakers that do not need any introduction because they were all active participants, Liliana and Jamil and Benjamin. And the question to them is, what are your takeaways of the day and a half? But you always have to keep it in a number of, you have to limit your takeaways so that people can remember. And I was once told, anytime you have more than takeaways that more than one hand, so maximum 5 fingers, beyond that, we all tend to forget. Actually, the best is if you can keep it to 3, but I know that it's been a little bit complex. So think about what we all should take away, and your advice in particular to us at Nazarbayev University, me personally. Okay?
Oh dear.
All right. So you all need a few more minutes. Shall I entertain the audience in the meantime? No? Ready? Ready to go.
These guys are ready.
Who wants to be first? No particular order.
Ladies.
Okay, well, thank you very much for
Liliana,
volunteering me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start. I have three main takeaways. That's really for myself, but I hope that you will find something interesting there as well.
I'm going to take note.
The first one, I was fascinated to hear, and it kept on coming up over and over again. It's the importance of knowledge in this 21st century. But what also made me think was that there are two particular issues around that. And the first one is the skill that young people and researchers and teachers actually need to sift through the vast quantity of knowledge and be able to recognize, what is right, what is good, what is valuable, and discard actually the rest. And I was very interested to hear that a number of people, educationalists, suggest that actually material curation will become a new area of growth. It will become a new, perhaps a new job. So material curation. And universities will have people working with various departments on curating materials, and that will be assisted very much by artificial intelligence. So I thought that was interesting. The second thing within that sort of importance of knowledge, the oil of the future, is how do you actually apply the knowledge? Because it's one thing to have all that knowledge, to possess it, but what do you actually do with it? And I think in order to ensure that young people apply knowledge properly, the thing that they need to learn is how to ask the right questions. And I think, again, this is something that universities, should consider. Teach young generation and not only the value of questions, but the value of asking, the right questions. So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is around competition. And again, most of the speakers spoke about universities competing nowadays, competing for students, competing for top researchers, competing for top staff. And I was reading recently a book by Anthony Seldon. If you haven't read it yet, it was only published 10 days ago, but if you haven't had access, I would expect you to read it immediately, of course. Please do so, because it's really fascinating. It's the title. It's the fourth education revolution, I think. But he is suggesting that eventually, I think he means like within the next 20 years, there will be global 100 top universities in the world that will actually have to work together. So instead of competing, they will be working together. They will be working on global problems and coming up with solutions, joint global solutions to these global problems. So that was very interesting. It doesn't mean that that there will be no space for other universities. He also talks about the emergence of professional universities, and I think one or two of my colleagues spoke about that. And again, very interesting information. James Dyson, I don't know if you're familiar with James Dyson, he's the Hoover man, he's the one who developed vacuum cleaners. So he got so fed up because he didn't get adequate graduates, engineering graduates from universities, that he actually opened his own university. So the university is, focusing on that very kind of, narrow area of engineering. And the third takeaway is, of course, the students. I was moderating the student panel, so it had to be one of those. And I think the idea of the students now are looking for value for money. And money could also mean time. The time they spent at university, what value do they actually derive, from their 4 or 5 years at university? So they want skills that will help them to become, useful members of the society, whether it's sort of, within their local environment or global environment. It could be jobs, it could be entrepreneurship, but they're looking for skills, to enable that. Within the university, they're looking for enhanced student experience. They're looking also for space, and I think this is sort of directed at you, at other presidents of other universities. They're looking for safe space. They're looking for safe space where they can experiment and where actually they can make mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake. This is your time. This is a safe space. Make mistakes, experiment, learn with us. We will guide you, so on and so forth. And finally, and that links up with my previous point, it's not only learning facts and figures, because Siri or Google can tell us that, but it's about applying that, application to real life, which awaits them.
Thank you. Thank you, Liliana. Let's move down the line. Jamil.
Thank you.
Yesterday you talked to us about hypothetical what if. Now develop your further ideas.
I'm going to have 7 takeaways, which is still within what Shigeo said, because Liliana had only 3, so it's 10 between the two of us.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's 5, 8 on average, that's one hand, right? First one, very quickly. Forget about rankings, please. We are so obsessed, and I see many universities, they have a ranking officer in some Australian universities. I think it's much more important to think in terms of benchmarking. Ranking is one stupid number which tells you you're number 1, 2, 3. No. Benchmarking, what are those aspects, those that are unique to your university on which you want to improve? And there it makes sense to compare yourself with those universities that you feel like that, and you will in that way determine your stretch targets. If you are doing things in a great way, you will climb in the rankings that are meaningful. And if you're not, forget about these rankings. Second one is to remind ourselves that it's not only about preparing professionals, it's about preparing, I think it's more important, citizens that will help improve our world if it can still be saved. Third one, and that was a strong message I took from the session of the students yesterday, which was a great session, is give us a curriculum that is tailored to our individual needs. Yeah. We don't want to fit into your curriculum, we want your curriculum to fit our needs. And that has to do with flexibility, individualized curriculum. It's not face-to-face versus online. It's how we can take advantage of all the new ways of learning and exchanging and sharing knowledge to build this flexible curriculum. Fourth point about, we mentioned lifelong learning. But this is really, I believe, the most important part of what our education. I have a quote from the Institute of Play. This is an institute that is dedicated to making learning fun. How do we learn from the way we enjoy playing to get to enjoy learning? So they say, our world is changing so quickly that we can only begin to imagine what the future will hold. But we are failing to teach our kids the skills and knowledge they need to succeed in today's world. So how will we prepare them for jobs that haven't even been invented yet? The real work of a 21st century education is to spark the passion for lifelong learning that our kids will need to navigate their way to a promising tomorrow. Number 5. We've talked a lot about curricular innovations, about pedagogical innovations. I wish we would talk more about innovation in assessment. You know, the big danger is that we change the curriculum, we change the way we teach, and then you go to the exam class, it's the same old exam. So we need also to think about curriculum there. And also to think about the structure of our universities, the way we are organized. All in college doesn't have academic departments. Arizona State University reshapes its faculties. It's not anymore faculty of chemistry. It's looking at sustainable development. And then you organize around that theme all the traditional disciplines that can contribute. Or you start establishing multidisciplinary centers. So thinking also about innovations in the way we are organized and structured. 6, and I think that's a point that was made about University of Illinois that you made very brilliantly, is that, you know, all in college, they have $500 million endowment, they have 600 students, you know. It's, I mean, what they've achieved is great, but the circumstances are so favorable. How do you scale up these innovations that work at small scale? How do you bring them to scale? I think a lot of work needs to be done. And to finish, I want to share with you 3 quotes about the future, which I think summarize a little bit the contradictions of thinking about the future, the fear that it brings into us, but also the hope that we can live with. So the first one is the nostalgic vision of the future. Paul Valéry, French philosopher who wrote a few years back. You know what the problem is with the future today? Is that it's not what it used to be like before. The second is from a British science fiction writer, William Gibson. You may have heard about him. He tells us the future is already here, but it is unequally distributed. But the one I really like is by Alan Kay. Alan Kay invented the Windows environment of the first Macintosh, remember? So he says, don't worry about what everybody else may say about the future. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Okay. Now, I think that like I'm the last, so I'm going to make the last remark and I have the last word. I want to be disruptive in my remarks. The first thing is that I like to flash back on what we have seen in the last 2 days. Challenges discussed. Okay, those are, I don't need to repeat them, but you have seen all those challenges in the last 2 days of discussion. New paradigms. We talk about the new paradigms and service learning, interdisciplinary, diversity, experiential learning, and so on. New approaches, personalized e-learning, alignment with job markers, big data tools, e-platforms, and so on. So my question to everybody here is that, have you heard anything that you haven't heard before? Is there anything that you haven't heard before that you have heard in the last 2 days? Now, for running a university in the last 9 years and also the funding agency in Hong Kong, we discuss all those different alternatives, approaches, day and night. Every day we discuss those alternatives and see how we can arrive at the best alternative. So in a sense that what I would say is to challenge everybody is that it is not something that today we are not disrupting and inventing anything new, but in a way we are faced with like a smorgasbord of different ideas. And how to best run a university is how to integrate all these ideas together in the most optimal way. And that's how you can arrive at the best situation. Every university is different. Nazarbayev will be very different from University of Illinois, will be different from Sony Buffalo. But you all know about the different skills, different tricks, different techniques. In a way, how to put all this together so that they all work. I think that's the trick, that's the difficulty that everybody is facing today. So to conclude, what I want to say, what is our future? So those are my takeaway and the observations that I want to share with everybody. The first is that the roles of students in the next 50 years will be very different. Because we all talk about the jobs have been changing in the last 10 years and things have been moving on very quickly. I reflect myself as a student. When I was a student in the 70s, things change every 10 years. We have a computer that changed in the 10 years, becoming a PC to a server. Then the internet took 10 years to change. But today, technologies are changing every 6 months to a year. We need to adapt much faster than before. We cannot just stand still and take 10 years to learn things. So in a way, we mentioned repeatedly, lifelong learning is important. Adaptive and robust to changes are important. Survival of not getting updated is important. These are what all the students are facing today. The student coming to university, they have those challenges ahead of them in the next 50 years. And the question for the university is, how do we prepare our students for these challenges in the next 50 years? Do we follow the same model of teaching 4 years and then let go of them and hope that they will do the best in the next 50 years? This is the question that all university administrators need to ask today. So this is something that we look forward to the future. What do we expect to see in the future? The second is the role of the university, because I think we discussed repeatedly, what is the role of the university? Is the university disappearing today? Would it still the same in 50 years? Do we still see the same university with 4-year curriculum in 50 years? I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves. Do we provide more opportunities for online learning, lifelong learning, more schools, education beyond the 4-year curriculum? Are we ready for that at this point, or are we still following the same old model that we have been doing for the last 100 years? So that affects the funding model for universities. Would the university be disappearing? How do we fund the university in the long run? That's a question that a second point I want to give to everybody. The third, which is also very important, and in Hong Kong, we are faced now with the challenges from the government and the Legislative Council. They are asking, we give you so much money every year. We fund you the money. What is the impact? Now, you can talk about the impact as saying the H index, the citations per paper, we are ranked number 7, number 10. They don't understand, they don't really care, because all they want to know is, has it created any economic, societal impact for the community? What is the impact to society, the country, the government, and so on? These are the things that they can understand. So the question is that the university needs to go beyond just the metrics, because I heard in the last 2 days, many people talk about metrics, but very few people talk about the impact to society. I think this is repeatedly the question that the government is asking. What is the impact on research? The impact is not the academic impact, not publishing in Nature or Science, but more going beyond the academic impact, going into the society. What effect does it have on society? What economic impact does it have on society? Can you generate any evidence to demonstrate that those impacts? Impact on education. We train students. Are they successful? Do they go out and become entrepreneurs? So those are the 3 messages that I want to share with everybody, because those are, I would say that those are food for thought today, in the sense that these are things that we need to debate and look at for the future. Thank you.
Thank you to all the 3 summarizers. And while you were presenting, I took note. But I also obviously have my own takeaways of it. as each one of you have, and I'm certainly curious and would like to hear from all of you as to what your respective takeaways are. So please don't be shy. In whatever form, pigeonhole, emails, whatever, please let us know. My own musings, in a way, are, yes, we all have to think about higher education, obviously, over the medium, longer term. And in particular here in Kazakhstan, we actually have to think about the short term and linking it to the medium, longer term. So there are, in a way, particular challenges for us, both as a new university, but also for a society which is really in the midst of transition. So in a way, we have these particular things to consider, but having the luxury of thinking for a moment about the longer term, I fully agree that the impact is going to be that the university of tomorrow will not be recognizable as we know it today. It will be much more possibly lose a network of various universities collaborating together, in a way. Happens to be maybe an element of the global network here in Astana or somewhere else. And the knowledge network that underlies it will indeed be global. And the future distinction is going to be between those knowledge hubs or institutions, you call them today universities, that will be able to be part of this global network versus those that are going to be left behind. And I think that's going to be a very big challenge. And of course, with it will be a total fundamental change in a way, the contractual arrangements that we're going to have with our students. Already we've heard this week that the days of the 4-year cohort-oriented studies, undergraduate studies, and so may have to start giving way to something which is going to cover 5, 6 years, or even more here, which of course doesn't sit well with our administration side, because immediately red flags are going to start to, rise. But what I take away in particular is that increasingly we all have to think in terms of individual learning roadmaps. And that is what our students will demand, and we have to find ways on how we are going to respond to them. Also, in terms of the lifelong learning impact, as I think we heard earlier this week from a colleague from the National University of Singapore, from the Lee Kuan Yew School, they started to talk about, in their terms, about a 20-year contract with mostly graduates and alumni of the university. Basically, the contract being, you continue to support us in a way, but we pledge of building up programs that will at least be useful for you guys over the next 20 years as you start to define and develop professionally, or even think about changing your professional directions. So I think the whole concept of how do we translate lifelong learning into something that's tangible in terms of our social contract, also financial contract maybe with our alumni and graduates, going to be very important. And overall, we all also think that, and probably one of the consensus views that starts to come out is that the student population in the future will look quite different. It will be way much more heterogeneous, also in age. Demographics will be totally different, age-wise, the background-wise, and the interest-wise. So as universities, we certainly will have to prepare for it. I certainly take to heart, and it's something that with the Provost we are discussing all the time. There is going to be a lot of pressure on rankings because it's one proxy it's sort of an easy proxy to see whether universities are good or not, even if they're flawed proxies. we probably will not be able to escape the league tables even in 20, 30 years from now. So there will always be some ranking. And it's going to be important that early on universities signal to both what we would call authorizing environment, those who are allowing us to exist, be it government, be it stakeholders, society, what specific metrics or areas we would like to be measured against. It's a benchmarking part that Jamil mentioned. And lastly, my takeaway, well, everybody talks about the difficulty of herding cats, you know, and that universities may try to be progressive, but professors tend to be very conservative. Well, yes and no. I used to be for a long time in an organization which prided itself, it was a World Bank, which prided itself on being a progressive force for international development and change. I can tell you internally, I tried when with my own unit, we had about 1,000 staff, and so economists, engineers, all kinds of, including educators. And I tried to shift them around, to move them away from the equivalent of departments and, you know, schools, colleges, and so, and move them away from and said, okay, what countries are you working on? So the aerial part, and try to get them to sit together. Precisely interdisciplinary thinking. You should have seen the response. It was a no-go. It was a no-starter, simply because they said, if you do that, we're going to migrate to another region of the World Bank. No? Just simply to say, I think any profession, you know, once you are have invested of yourself so much, you tend to, you know, be also at the same time become almost by necessity, inevitably very conservative, because that's what you're used to, and that's what you feel most comfortable in. And nobody really likes to be outside the comfort zone unless they're being forced to. And what it tells me is that we constantly need, therefore, to have, that's where the disruption maybe comes in, we need to constantly bring in new blood circulation. We need to find ways of bringing in new views, very often associated with younger generations, obviously, but still find good use for the veterans. And people often say that you cannot teach new tricks to old dogs, but I actually do not agree with this view. I think if you provide people enough incentives, everybody can learn. That's what lifelong learning is about. So thank you very much. And let's meet again next year. Thank you.